welcome to Dr. Elizabeth Robinson. You were recently appointed faculty at South Dakota State University. Prior to that, you have taught at Missouri Southern State University, Kansas State University, Kansas Wesleyan University, and Southwestern Oklahoma University. You're also in the Topeka Symphony and a co-founder and current vice president for the Flute New Music Consortium. And you've also got an album of flute quartets coming out next year, which I'm excited to talk to you about. But I wanted to start kind of talk about your beginnings as a flutist and getting into teaching. Can you start there? How'd you get into playing the flute?
Well, first off, thanks so much for having me. But as far as how I got into playing the flute, I think like a lot of folks in smaller towns, my first exposure was in the elementary and middle school band. I really, really, really wanted to play the trombone, but I was a very short child with very short arms and was persuaded that that was not a great idea. So I think my family and probably my neighbors were very excited when I settled on the flute instead. So that started the journey, and it's been ever since.
That's great. And you talk about in your biography how you kind of define your career through like the opportunities you created for yourself for performance, but then also all the opportunities you tried to create in some of the areas that you began teaching in. Can you tell me more about those?
Sure. I mean, I think like a lot of 21st century musicians, the world that I thought I would be entering when I finished music school was a little bit different than I had imagined it. Mm-hmm. So I was really lucky to have several very creative and visionary friends. And, you know, we created the Flute New Music Consortium, and I've sort of used that to build my own performing opportunities. With it, discovered a love of new music and working with new composers. And I've tried to share that with my students, sometimes in literal ways with, you know, having them be involved with the Flute New Music Consortium or commissioning new works, but sometimes a little bit, you know, more as a lead by example kind of situation. I really like sitting down with my students and figuring out what it is that they enjoy doing or what it is that they feel passionate about. Mm-hmm. And we do a process called reverse engineering, where we think, okay, if this is where I want to be, what are the steps that I need to take to get there? And so we kind of imagine the like no limits, best case scenario, and work backwards from there, what it would take to get to that place. So it kind of gives me the opportunity to learn a little bit more about the students and what makes them tick. And like any great project, it teaches you a lot about a lot of different topics and a lot of different fields that, you know, don't necessarily relate directly to music making, but help us to navigate the world that our music making exists in and do a better job of bringing that music to a different population.
That's great. Yeah, because it's always hard as a musician, right? To like, if you go into music, you have to figure out how are you going to make a living off this. There's only so many like big orchestral jobs, which is what I kind of had like my sights set on when I started doing this. And then someone, you know, gave me this idea, like, you know, there's these companies that sell flutes and you could do that. And I said, oh, wait. And that kind of like blew my mind that I could do other things. And I got out of that like tunnel vision of performance. So it's kind of cool that you, from the start, kind of start with your students, like, what do you want to do? And you backtrack on how to get to.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all have grand aspirations of the big orchestra, big teaching job. But, you know, like you said, there's only so many, and there are so many other facets of the music industry. Selling flutes. I imagine you never thought you would spend a large chunk of your career interviewing other flutists, but we are. I mean, and even 3 or 4 years ago, this thing that we're doing over the computer would have been completely unimaginable. So, you know, where there's a will to do something or an interest in doing it, I find that there's a way. And sometimes we learn new things about ourselves as people and as performers because we're exploring various facets and options. So, it makes the world go round. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah. So you've taught at several different schools at this point. And this is a podcast for teachers, kind of by teachers.
Sure.
What sort of advice do you have for students and teachers out there who are looking to snag one of these jobs or teach in a more maybe rural area? Because a lot of your jobs have been in places that are not like huge cities or like the big school that, you might want.
Yeah. Well, and a couple of the jobs that you mentioned were part-time jobs. The one in Oklahoma was a maternity leave for a good friend and colleague of mine was having her first child and needed a little bit of space to, focus on that. Mm-hmm. So, the the advice that I would give to my younger self and to anyone else who's hoping to break into the teaching world, be open to possibilities. Mm-hmm. I did a lot of driving, and I don't necessarily recommend following my path exactly and doing as much driving as I was doing, but I sort of kept my sights set on where it was I wanted to be and whether it was possible to make these opportunities work within the framework of my life at the time. And so I took, smaller jobs at smaller schools. I think one of the schools you listed was only 2 students in the studio when I started. So I was spending as much money on gas as I was making in the lessons. I know I was very fortunate at the time that was not the thing that was the difference between me having food to eat that week or not. So I had the space to do that. Mm-hmm. But sometimes pursuing an opportunity that doesn't necessarily reward you immediately and monetarily leads to larger opportunities down the road. So just constantly evaluating sort of the landscape of where you are and how that relates to where you want to be down the road, and asking yourself, does this opportunity take me closer to that, or is it actually a distraction that's going to take me a little bit further away from that? So I taught a lot of things. Some of them were flute, some of them were less flute specific. I was actually just having this conversation with a student before this interview with you. A lot of them didn't necessarily relate directly to my flute playing or my flute teaching in an obvious way when I started, but they sort of all come together into the building blocks that make you into the person that you are. And I know that there were certain formative, professional teaching experiences that factored very heavily into my interview for this position. So I have to think that they built me into a person that is able to be in the place doing the thing that I am doing now. Yeah. And so, I encourage prospective teachers and students who think they may want to become teachers to explore the things which make them unique, or the things that really light them up that, maybe it's not flute specific. Maybe it's like gamelan ensemble, but then maybe one of the universities that you listed didn't originally want me for flute. They wanted me to teach world music because I had done a lot with gamelan ensemble. And so that was my foot in the door. And then when, it was time to hire a flutist for something else, I was already there and everybody knew me. And it led to some other opportunities that were more directly related to my interests.
Yeah, that's great. So be open and kind of piece together all these different like skills. Like for me too, like I grew up like in a very sales oriented family. Like, well, my family does sales, all that. So it kind of like, it wasn't something that I did part-time at a college, but it turned into this. And I think if you know how to take the skills that you've got or the experiences that you've had and know how to purpose them to whatever you're doing, it can be great.
I think that's a really much more succinct way of saying what I was trying to say. Yeah, I just keep your nose in the air for the scent of an opportunity, and then bring whatever skills you have, particularly if they're formative things like sales experience in the family. I have to think made you a stronger beginning sales candidate than maybe some of the other folks who are interested in your position.
And even some of the schools where you said you only had like 2 students, it was a great opportunity for you to add to your resume. But I imagine for those 2 students is also you touched them and inspired them in some way. So it's like, I think as teachers, I have 1 student right now. You had 2 students at the school. You still feel like you are impacting them somehow, I would think. And that probably kept you going too.
Yeah. I mean, I know different people have a different mentality about it, but, my attitude at all of the schools that I have been at has always been to behave like it's the job that I want.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I someday envisioned myself at a major university with dozens of flute students that were coming in for lessons each week, what would I offer them? I would offer them the opportunity to interact with other teachers. I would offer them, chamber ensembles. I would offer them, insert any number of experiences. And so you bring as much of that as you can within the framework of the time that you have. So, with a 2-student university, you're there one afternoon a week, but you make sure that afternoon really counts.
Yeah.
And I'd be in touch with them in the days in between. So we'd, I saw this neat article, or Flute Center of New York is doing this cool interview series. Let me just make sure that you see this, so that flute is on their mind and you're sort of shaping their experience, even if you can't be with them physically because of job limitations.
Yeah, that's great. How did the Flute New Music Consortium come about? It's almost 10-year anniversary of it next year.
Yeah, it's, I guess it would be almost ready to start middle school if it were a person, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Flute New Music Consortium, how did that get started? Shelley Martinson was a friend of mine from graduate school, and I think we were sitting up late one night on GChat or some other 10-year-old technology for communicating. She'd just finished a dissertation about 3 works for flute by Chinese composers, one of whom was Zhou Long. And she really wanted to commission a work by Zhou Long, but he had won a Pulitzer. And so his commission rates were out of reach for an individual performer.
Yeah.
So we were just sort of firing back and forth things we could do. And I think she was the one who found out what a consortium was. I don't think I had heard the word at the time, but it's, a group of folks who sort of pool resources to commission a work by a larger composer, like someone like Zhou Long.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in the middle of the night over Google Chat is how Flute New Music Consortium got started. And like most other ideas, Shelley took it and ran with it. And here we are 10 years later. It's, a 40 or 50 member organization as of right now, working on our fifth, I'm going to say the wrong number. We're working on not our second, third large scale commission. So it's kind of an exciting thing to see happen.
That's great. And you guys have a competition every year for compositions?
Oh, we do. Yes. So every year we host a composition competition. Mm-hmm. There are right now 3 different categories. So each year we ask composers to submit their works for solo flute, their works for flute and either piano or electronics. And then we do a rotating category, which next year is going to be flute and a few other acoustic instruments. So composers submit all of their works, and we send all of those works to blind round judges who narrow it down to 2 or 3. And then the members, which could be anyone that wants to join FNMC as a performing member, they get to vote to pick their favorite. And one of my favorite features, and I think one of the coolest features of FNMC, is if you're a member, you get the score for those winning works, and we have performance rights for a year. So essentially for your $20 performance membership, you get 3 scores. And it's a great way to meet or to get to know, I guess, the works of right now 3 composers that you may or may not have heard of, and you can try out their works and see what you think, and check their catalog and see if they have other works that maybe suit your fancy a little bit more.
That's great. And the competition, is that separate from the works that you are commissioning outside of that?
Yeah. So the way we're set up, we have a commissioning membership.
Mm-hmm.
And if you join as the commissioning member, you're contributing towards the large scale commission. So right now we're waiting for a work. I believe it's for solo flute, but I may be misspeaking. We're waiting for a work from the composer Rina Esmail. But each year in the summer, we host the composition competition. So the performing members get 3 scores. The commissioning members get those same 3 scores, and they get to be a part of the group premiere of the Rina Esmail work.
So we have the 5th composition from Rina. I mean, is it by the end of this year, or what's the...
It's fall of 2024.
Okay. Awesome.
So soon, but not super soon.
Mm-hmm. And then sounded like you all are going to also start a podcast series next year.
Yes, we are. By the time this interview has aired, mm-hmm. The podcast should also be starting. We're releasing our first episode in December. We're doing a series of interviews with actually the winners of the composition competition. Mm-hmm. But we are hoping to branch out and start interviewing some other folks who have cool new music projects. We're hoping to do an episode featuring some works by our large scale commission composer Rina Esmail, so you can get to know her music a little and join in for the large scale commission if it gets you going. So it should be a good time.
That's great. Yeah, because I think it is more fun, like even at a concert, just hearing someone speak about the piece that they're going to perform, whether it's the composer or not. But then getting to perform it yourself, I think if you get a chance to like hear these interviews, that would make it even more meaningful and give you some insight on what to do when you're practicing to perform it, which is great.
I definitely hope so. I know I've learned a lot from just the preliminary interviews that we've done. We met with the composer of the flute quartet that won the chamber music category a couple of weeks ago, and we had a really exciting and maybe a little nerdy conversation about the octopus, which was apparently among the inspirations for his piece. Mm. So learned something new and got a little biology lesson also.
Yeah. This is great. I actually was just at an event with Valerie Coleman, and there was a lot of talk about just getting more new works out there and composers and like a more diverse set of composers too, which is super important because we tend to all play a lot of stuff that's just, it's older and we keep kind of repeating a cycle. So I think this group and what you guys are doing kind of helps break that so we can get more new and interesting works out there that people will perform.
That's definitely the hope. I think one of our original missions was to have more works written for flute by composers who hadn't necessarily written a lot of solo music for flute. Mm-hmm. And hopefully making flutists more aware of composers who are writing for flute via the use of the composition competition. I know I've discovered a lot of my current favorite works through either winners or finalists of that competition. So it's been a really great resource for me, and we hope for the flute community at large.
How do people get involved with you all?
Reach out. We're a pretty small, very actively involved board. If you want to be involved, shoot one of us an email. We're always looking for somebody to cover some activity. Like I said, there's 2 levels of membership. We tried to make it accessible to everyone. So the Rina Esmail Commission, I think, is $175, but that gets you membership from the moment you join until the end of the group premiere, which is still, I think, 18 months away as we're having this conversation. So if you divide 175 by 18, that's like $10 a month. That's not I mean, it's not accessible for everybody, but it's not terrible. And otherwise, the performing membership is, $20, and that gets you a year of membership and 3 scores. So we've got
$20 for
hopefully.
3. Yeah.
Pardon?
I said $20 for 3 scores is great.
Even if you only end up loving one of them, it's still, and it's your membership, and you get to vote on the competition works the next year. So you get to be involved in the scores you would get the next year. So I think it's a bargain. But yeah, just join, reach out, carrier pigeon, Blair, whatever. We're a pretty friendly and welcoming bunch. I am not the most articulate of the group of us.
Let's talk about your album. You have the Aviary Quartet. Are you a member of this group?
This group was formed for these pieces.
Okay, cool.
I was commissioning works for flute ensemble for my flute ensemble at Missouri Southern. And I think the works started to be delivered in early 2020. And hopefully everyone knows where I'm going when I say early 2020, but we had all of these works for a gathering of flutists, and then we weren't allowed to gather anymore.
Right.
So the sort of sad thing about a lot of the pieces on my album is that they were written for students who never got to play them. Yeah. But the sort of happy thing about the works on my album is that it gave me an excuse to collaborate with some professional flutists that I really enjoy and admire. So I had a group of gals come together and we recorded those quartets for an album, and some of them and I are going to take those same quartets on tour and play at a couple of flute fairs and flute festivals later this year. So COVID slowed everything down, but they're really exciting new pieces that I'm really excited to share with the rest of the flute community, like yesterday, but soon.
And their Aviary, that's inspired by bird song, am I right?
Well, a lot of the works are bird inspired. I caught my little penguin over here. One of my favorite pieces from the album is a work for solo flute, which is based on the rock hopper penguin. They're the little ones that bounce over the rocks rather than do the penguin waddle. So it's a fun little piece for solo flute by Kim Osberg, which she called Hoppy Feet. We have another flute quartet that is based on fancy chickens. So there's a variety of just really unique chickens with like crazy plumage, or one that has a tail that's 3 or 4 feet long. That quartet, Foul Play, is also by Kim Osberg, and each movement is written to sort of evoke the sounds of an ornate chicken. I went through a phase where I was really enthusiastic about flamingos. I don't know, they're so beautiful from a distance and so awkward looking up close. And if you get into National Geographic, I guess they do some fun little dancing things to attract a mate. So there's this thing called the flamingo ballet, where all of the male flamingos will kind of look left and look right, and they do this like little paddly thing with their feet. It's YouTube is an amazing place where you can lose many hours of your life, I will say. But Anne McKinnon wrote a really beautiful piece called Flamingo, modeled after this sort of ballet that they do. So if you didn't know it was about flamingos, I don't think it would interfere with your experience at all, but you and I, and now your listeners, will know that it's a flute quartet about flamingos. So a lot of the pieces are inspired by birds, but rather than being the like beautiful, elegant flying birds that the flute is so often associated with, they're awkward or oddly shaped or flightless birds. So it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek aviary thing.
Awesome. That'll be fun.
I hope so. I had a good time making it. I think the composers had a really good time writing it. I hope other people have a good time enjoy listening to it.
Great. So about the time we release this, you also are going to be doing a event with us at the Flute Center virtually. Can you tell us a little bit about what people might look forward to?
Well, we're going to talk about preparing for auditions, but rather than talking about all of the minutia of how to practice this excerpt exactly correctly, we're going to talk a little bit about building a system of audition prep that works for you. So sort of like the where do I want to be in 10 years life goals that we do with students when building their own careers. I do a little bit of reverse engineering. This is where I want to be on audition day. Mm-hmm. This is how much time I have before audition day. What kinds of things do I need to do in the space between those two to really show whoever's evaluating this audition the things that I can do as a player?
Great.
Yeah.
Very great. All right. And then lastly, I always ask a little bit about this at the beginning, but do you have any like words of wisdom for teachers?
Just words. Sorry, I spoke over you.
Oh, it's okay. Just any words of wisdom for teachers in general. I usually ask more for like young people who really want to get into teaching and maybe are just embarking or about to embark. What are some of the best little nuggets of advice you can give?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think instinctively, I want to say there's no one right way to be a teacher. I think we've all had that teacher who is so impactful, and we want to be like him or her and create that same impact for everyone who comes through our studio. Find the best version of you and lean into it. We all have something, I think, really special to bring to all of our interactions, whether they be teacher-student or human. Bring the best version of yourself and make sure that you're teaching the person in front of you. Everybody has wildly different goals. Some of my best students had no desire to pursue flute beyond middle or high school. And my job in that situation was to teach them about life using the flute as a metaphor. I have had other students who did want to pursue flute as a vocation, and my job was to teach them about the flute, but also about navigating life as a flutist. Mm-hmm. So really trying to focus on the situation or the issue in front of you and the person in front of you, and not the student that maybe you think you should have or wish you did have, or the teacher you wish you were. Just trying to be very present for the situation that you and your student are both currently finding yourself in. And kind of like we talked about at the beginning, being open to new and unconventional ways of getting those things accomplished. No student's journey is going to be identical to mine. Mine probably wasn't identical to yours. And I think there's a lot of beauty in that.
Wonderful. That's great.
Thanks.
All right. Well, I really want to thank you for being here, and I'm looking forward to your event coming up. And so I'll see you then, but thank you again so much for doing this. And I'm looking forward now that I've heard more about your album, to really hear this. So when that comes out, everyone, please go check it out, because I know it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I hope that it is. I hope that you enjoy it. And I'm looking forward to our event as well. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Cool.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want to learn more about our guests, there's more information below. If you're a teacher, make sure to sign up for Club FCNY to unlock free shipping, extended trials, and commission for teachers, as well as other exclusive benefits for you and your students. As always, remember to like, comment, and subscribe.